Want to make a difference in geographic fields? Volunteer with the North Star of GIS and help build a racially just geography for a racially just world. Sign up now at northstarofgis.org/volunteer.
Be Black. Be bold. Be innovative. Show the world equitable geo.
We're coming together as a collective to celebrate people of African descent, the diaspora, and talking about geospatial equity and justice.
You're listening to The North Star Gaze, a podcast with intimate stories from geo luminaries.
So hi everyone, I'm really excited again for this particular episode, and our guest this time is a champion for GIS in education, which is something that is really important when talking about GIS and how do we make it trickle down to not just the old people, but also the young people in schools. And so from where I come from, I'm from Kenya, and we rarely see GIS being used in the younger dynamic on the younger population. So being taught GIS, for example, in primary school. So that's maybe between age of 6 to maybe 18. I literally got exposed to GIS when I went to university in my third year, and I was doing a very primary course, which is environmental science. And so this conversation is not only pivotal for me, I think it's one of the components that would spearhead this conversation, and just looking at what our guest is doing and how transferable that might be for other regions as well, and what that looks like impact-wise and also tracking-wise. And so I'm excited about this conversation on GIS for education. He's a supporter for educators and young people, and just being able to ensure that GIS for schools is being used well and breaking down the complexities for teachers. How do we make young students adopt it and use it in a way that's sustainable, impactful, and also equitable? And so without further ado, allow me to welcome our guest for today, Jason Sawle. Hi, Jason.
Thanks for that.
I definitely didn't do you justice in the introduction. Your presentation at the homecoming was very impactful. Maybe we can start with you briefly talking about yourself and then your presentation. Why was it important for you to be at the event, and why are these platforms important for the kind of work that you do?
Yeah, so a bit of background of how I got into GIS in the first place. And so it was a mixture of things, and probably about over 25 years ago when I first started to get into GIS. Previous to that, I trained as an architectural technician. And so I was working on sort of very early computer-aided design work in London in the very late 80s. I went to university, and from there I first encountered GIS, similar to you earlier, sort of later in my courses. It was very complex, but because I'd done CAD before, I had an affinity for it. It was easier for me to understand, to abstract the world, essentially, using GIS. And from that, I went into do some research at university. We won some European Union funding money to run a GIS project for schools in the north part of Calais in northern France and southeast England. And this is around sort of the 2000s, before Google Earth and things like this and Google Maps. Essentially, I was really just interested in how do we simplify this quite complex tool so teachers can make use of it in the classroom. It seemed to me that every kid should know about this. Every teacher should be using it. And I just couldn't, why isn't it happening? And so I took that on with other people around me as well. Okay, this is our mission. This is what we want to focus on. We can fast forward a little bit from there. And then I had a small education company working with schools with GIS that Esri UK purchased in 2009. I went to work for them in their education team. And eventually I was the head of education at Esri UK. And so I was looking after higher education in schools. And that was, and then from there, I really went on to doing more work with Corporate Esri Inc., as we would call them in the UK now, and doing more work with large partners like National Geographic and Microsoft, and to a point where actually I transitioned across in 2021 to Esri Inc. as their global schools manager for K-12. And so that's that sort of a whistle-stop tour of how I got to where I am. And then that's coming back into, if we think about the North Star and the homecoming and my role in that, it may not be obvious to people, it may be obvious to people on the podcast, but I'm an able-bodied, middle-aged, straight white guy. In terms of intersectionality, I don't have too many intersections that affect me, but I do see myself as an ally in diversity, equity, and inclusion working now. And so I'm thinking about, okay, what's my role? What do I do in this? And so one of those things for me, in terms of being an ally, I'll take it very seriously, is turning up. And so when the first homecoming came around, also it's at Howard. Wow, I've never been to Howard. I want to go to Howard. And so it was for me to go there and just to learn, just to sit, absorb, be out of my comfort zone to a certain extent, Particularly this year, there's a lot of call and return. I had no idea what's going on. There was some singing going on in there. I've never experienced any of these things in a conference before. It's amazing. And so for me, it's a big learning experience. But there's some amazing people there. There's some really super smart people. So I'm just thinking, okay, how can they help me do the thing I need to do? How they can help me do the role that I need to play? And on top of all that, people are a lot of fun there. It's a really good time. So there's not one reason to go there. There's multiple ones in there for me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jason, for that. I want to ask a two-part question. So you've told us a little bit about your role, and I'd like to better understand what it means to be in education at Esri. But also I'd like to ask you about how you see your role in GIS changing in the future.
I see my role as like a bridge between two worlds. So between the Esri technology role, it's a high-tech GIS company. I have one foot in that space. Consider myself to be reasonably technical. I understand how the tech works and how to apply it. My other foot is firmly planted in the school classroom. But these two groups rarely speak the same language. There's lots of misunderstandings happening in that time. I've seen my role over the years as being able to translate between these things, be able to say to the company, this is what these people need, this is what the teachers need. And then turning around and facing the teachers and saying, okay, this is how you can use it in the classroom. This is how you can teach with it. I think we went through a lot of time of teaching about GIS, and most teachers don't want to learn about GIS. They want to be better teachers. And so a better way to approach it is actually using the technology to teach with it. So teach better geography, teach better earth science, teach better environmental science through the medium of GIS. And it's really thinking about that. And that's where the educated part comes in, and thinking about pedagogy. How do we sequence these things? How do we model the teaching of these things for teachers so they can understand it in the first place? And then apply that and deliver that for their students in the classroom. It's very easy. With GIS, the cognitive load can be huge. So I see our role a lot of the time to be very much aware of that, and how do we give you just enough information at the right time for you to progress and actually do something meaningful in the classroom. To the end of the day, to really improve the learning for the young people in the classroom and to excite them, but they want to learn more about GIS essentially, and hopefully a subject that we're studying. And so that's the role is going to be quite varied. So we could be working with one school, one teacher. We could be working with the whole country in that and designing a whole system. How do you actually put a system in place that allows a whole education ministry to adopt GIS as a teaching?
Thank you.
Jason, one of the other things that struck me, and I like that you've talked about your knowledge on Esri technology and how we can have that planted in classrooms. You've mentioned young people. I think it would be interesting to give context on as well, what is the age group we are looking at, and also how we are able to track the success of these programs. Do you monitor that and see how these students are evolving and how this probably would impact their choice of career?
I'd say so. Probably, if we look at the age ranges first of all, so probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were looking mainly in middle school and high school in there. But I think recent changes, and we'll maybe come and talk about something called National Geographic MapMaker, a new concept for delivering GIS technology and content. We can certainly move into elementary schools. And so I see a pathway from elementary school to middle school to high school and often to university or community college in there, or even at 18, actually being good enough to actually and skilled enough to go and get a job. So I think it's very important. GIS is very unusual in terms of the technology, where you could plot a pathway around it from an elementary school all the way through into a career at 18, or go and study at university, research at university, and on from there, so, and having a really meaningful and impactful life to using it. There's not many technologies that allow you to do that. And so in terms of tracking, so let's just come back to your comment. You didn't find GIS until you were in your third year. Now, that's a really common experience around that, and you only found it because you went to a particular course. So the scope of people who can actually access GIS, let's say 10 years ago, is really tiny. You were lucky enough to go on a particular course that actually did GIS, and you learned about the GIS on there. So a small fraction of the population. If I use the UK as an example, which I know very well, we started our GIS for Schools program, 10 years plus ago, around there, and same situation. So students are only encountering GIS at university in there. Esri UK are now regularly employing graduates onto their graduate scheme who first used GIS at school. So they use it for various projects. They were collecting data with Survey 123, they were mapping data in ArcGIS Online in there, and suddenly it was a thing in there. And so I can say we've certainly shifted the age range down, maybe to a little bit of middle school as well in the UK. I think we do see some of that in certain parts of the US as well. in there. So you've got a program called the Geospatial Semester at James Madison. That's been very successful in working with young people in feeder schools to university and encourage them to do more work around that. And in terms of working across whole countries, that's still probably a work in progress. We are seeing that the Department of Education in England did adopt something called the National Education Nature Park, which uses GIS technology to get young people out and engaged in nature, collecting data about information around their schoolyards, how do they green their schoolyards, how do they improve biodiversity. And so we're seeing adaptations like that are being successful. And then just generally, we see thousands of schools globally who are using Esri technology in their classrooms on a regular basis.
Still building up on that question, do you think there's opportunity to bring that outside of the UK, outside of the US to other parts of the globe? How do you see that upscaling to other regions, and how easy or complex would it be to adopt, for example, in Kenya or any other country on the global south?
The global south. So we would see Esri South Africa, for instance, has a really successful education program. They've got a number of ways they actually approach it, but particularly if there's low or no internet connection, various other mechanisms where you can still engage with GIS, and other more traditional sort of online applications around GIS in there. Esri Rwanda does some work around there, and I know Esri East Africa is all pockets of it, and it's something. And so it's for us, and also working with National Geographic, is definitely an area we're looking to expand into. But it's hard. It's fine. We have the M-Pesa Academy in Kenya. They're a big user of our technology, doing really amazing stuff, actually getting out into the community, doing community-focused activities, and all the sort of things, project-based learning applications in there. And doing some quite sophisticated things and having an impact on the ground as well. But these tend to be isolated. We haven't quite managed yet to join these things together. And that's certainly, for me, something that I'll be working on, certainly over the next few years, is how to improve that. And who are the people, where are the people we need to work with? That's the other thing. What we need to find like-minded people in the countries and the continents in there to come together as a group.
That's great. So, Jason, let me ask you this. Many of us who are members or active in North Star of GIS got involved because of challenges that we experienced as professionals working in GIS. What challenges, if any, you have faced as an ally of North Star of GIS? And you've experienced more of homecoming than I have, and I'm a board member. What keeps you coming back to homecoming year after year?
It's been quite amazing. My own sort of self-development and self-education around this release. If I was to take a step back from before I maybe even knew about North Star, back in Esri UK, and thinking about, okay, I was making a really common mistake that I think a lot of white people might make, is they're like, I'm not racist, so therefore anything I do can't be racist. Yeah, I realise now that I was an idiot, but it took me, once I realised that, and then I read, and I think, okay, there's the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. That sounds like a good place to start. And so I think I didn't even get to the end of the first chapter when I put it down, thinking, well, that changes everything. So for understanding the things that I do, things that I'm part of, if I want to be anti-racist around that, then I can't continue to do the things I'm doing. So I have to change. And also now I know, I can't unknow this knowledge. And so I can't be complicit. So now I'm in a bind. So I have to change stuff. I have to do different things in there. And so that means, in terms of being an ally, so that the challenges would be actually being in a room with all white people, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, and I'm the one who's racist. I'm in the room. So I'm saying, what about diversity, equity, inclusion? What are we doing here? How are we shaping our work in there? Sometimes to tumbleweed, but doing it consistently every time and not being afraid. Even if it's uncomfortable, if I'm finding it uncomfortable, other people are finding it uncomfortable, it doesn't matter. That's the role.
Invest in racial equity in geography. Your donation to the North Star of GIS fuels scholarships, mentorship, community-driven initiatives, and more. Give today at northstarofgis.org/donate.
So you were at homecoming this year. You were at homecoming last year. We're looking forward to having you at homecoming in 2025. Why should somebody else? Why is it important for you to continue to be a part of homecoming, please?
So I'd like to see more allies there. Yeah. And why should they come? It's actually immerse yourself, be open to and listen. My first year, I learned a huge amount. I decided just to keep my mouth shut and listen. No one wants to hear from me. And so that gave me strength that I'm doing the right thing. It is the right thing to be doing, even if it is uncomfortable. And then think about, I'm this 6'2", able-bodied, straight white guy. what's the risk to me? What's the risk to me to raise my voice? Very little. So it always feels like the least I can do. And to have more allies thinking that way, from my perspective, would be a help. And so that's why I come there, just to immerse myself, meet friends who I've now made there, and keep learning. And it's fun. It is fun. This year's one, the singing. I was not expecting the singing and the call.
Great. Thank you for that.
So I'm curious, Jason, I know you've obviously been in the industry for quite some time. You've talked about 25 years of experience. You've moved from Esri UK to Esri Global. And so I'm curious, what has been your biggest breakthrough in this journey through the years?
I would say there's probably two for me. And it was really with the advent of ArcGIS Online became. So ArcGIS Online took us from pretty much using ArcMap or maybe Edgy or these other sort of applications. And we had some Silverlight applications in now that were, you still had to go and install them. There were still lots of barriers to schools actually getting involved in this. And suddenly you could open up a website and do some interesting things on there. That was a game changer in there. But then we had to change up. I think we were still at that stage, still teaching a lot about GIS. Right? It was almost like the training. If you went to a university to meet pre-service teachers, I was seeing a lot of them getting a standard 101 GIS training set maybe from the university in there. And it doesn't relate to their pedagogy. It doesn't relate to what they need to experience in the classroom. And so I was really thinking about, okay, we need to change this. We need to be really useful for them. And as I think at that point there, GIS had the potential to become a solution to a teacher's problems rather than just being another problem to solve. Now, I don't think we weren't there yet. But I think we're very much on that journey at the moment now. And really, the concept, I'm sure I wasn't the one to invent it. I'm sure it was around before that. But the idea of teaching with GIS, using GIS as a medium for young people to experience the latest content, the latest data, the latest sort of tools we have to learn about the world. And what we're doing is helping the teacher being a better teacher and hopefully create a more engaging lesson for the students with this new technology. With the added bonus, there's going to be some osmosis where the students are going to absorb some GIS. They're going to learn about layers and transparency and turning layers on and off. Just new basic stuff is going to just absorb into it. And with that sort of hope and work to actually then, the ones who are really interested, there is a space for them to go on and do more, to actually then learn about GIS.
I'm really excited that you mentioned ArcGIS Online, because I get very excited when people mention emergent tech and how GIS has evolved over time. I definitely agree. I think ArcGIS Online has been a big game changer, even from where I'm sitting. And so I'm curious, when you're talking about emergent tech and how you see that shaping how we look at GIS for education, you've talked about how it was exciting when you had GIS as a medium and not just actually a solution to a teacher's problem. And so I'm curious, what are you excited about?
So in 2023, we started to work more closely with National Geographic Society, and working together with other teams inside Esri, we created something called National Geographic MapMaker. And if you don't think about that as just simply as an app, it's essentially it's an app, it's a configuration of that. But if you think beyond that, think it was a concept. Essentially what we've done, we've been able to, from all the experience of having about thousands of interactions with teachers over the years, seeing what works. And MapMaker is the manifestation of all the things inside a GIS that works, 2D and 3D inside one app. Swipe tool inside one place, rather than being in a different place, you have to go, it's hard to go and find. Curated content that's selected for the curriculum, not the millions of items inside ArcGIS Online or elsewhere on the internet. And then also targeted resources that deal with particular standards. And so if you think about MapMaker as being a concept of actually bringing these things together, and that's a breakthrough. Here's a package of things you can go and do as a teacher, go and teach earth science, environmental science, world geography, with this package, with technology that's designed for you, with content that's designed for you, and with lessons that are designed for you. So that's, for me, it's only the continued development of online has allowed us to do that thing and get to that point. And this is where I think we're starting to be a solution to teachers' problems rather than another problem for them to solve. And beyond that, beyond, say, MapMaker to the masses of people just actually going with GIS, it's going to be, everyone's talking about AI, stuff like that in there. And so I've been thinking, I'm fairly skeptical, thinking, where does it fit? What is it? We've had machine learning for decades around there. But I'm just starting to see with large language models into ArcGIS, and I'm interested in people who are not using any GIS, who don't have any GIS knowledge. That's my interest in that. And we're starting to see AI being in there. Whereas before, you need to know a lot. Like if you want to ask a question with the GIS, show me the median income for houses in Kentucky. Yeah, you've got to know a lot of knowledge before to go. If you want to actually use the technology, if you want to use, say, the filter tool inside the map viewer, inside ArcGIS Online, a lot of buttons to click. You've got to understand the statistics and things like that. You could ask that question. You could just simply ask that question. Show me the median household income in Kentucky. And the map can show you that in there. So in terms of actually accessibility, maybe democratizing access to this type of content, you haven't got to understand the buttonology to go through and make all these clicks in there. So simplifying that process. Same with things like smart mapping. So people can create some smart mapping, some nice maps using the AI instead of actually the smart mapping interface. And the reason I say that is because our experience of working with novice users is that's the barrier they hit. That's where the cognitive load flows over them. Their eyes glaze over and they switch off. So I think we could get people asking more complex, maybe meaningful geographic questions through the use of AI. So I think that's it's not there yet, but I think that's a really exciting emerging area for us. To come into there. And very quickly, I'm not sure what drones are, maybe emerging. Drones are out in there, but drones are blended with VR. To go out and fly a drone, build a 3D model, this idea of digital twins in there. Recent advances in the technology, again, inside the scene viewer and things like that, have democratized the ability to actually go and create your own VR experiences. So, I was at school in Detroit, Project Those Academy in November, and I asked the kids, who's got a VR headset? And more than half did. I was amazed. And so those students could actually be doing some climate biodiversity work. They could be doing work around their school campus in there and incorporating their drone work into the rest of the GIS work and actually creating something really quite, I'll say complex, but complete in terms of actually a virtual reality experience that they've generated from their data that they collected in there. Previous to that, if I go back a year, or maybe 18 months, that was really hard to do. That was really hard to do now. And now school kids can do it. Right now. So, because I think these are exciting breakthroughs. I think these sort of things make GIS exciting for young people.
That's a perfect lead-in, Jason, to one of my other questions related to our theme for Homecoming 2024. I'm curious, because you're talking about these young children having access to drones and really creating the future, what might an Afro-futuristic utopia look like from your viewpoint?
If I go back to the example of Project Douglas Academy in Detroit, there's some really interesting opportunities in terms of actually, although there's some programs around biodiversity, climate sustainability. These young people could be driving that work. There's no reason why they actually couldn't be imagining what their local area looks like. They could be collecting the data. They could be collecting the VR and creating the VR examples of actually what they want a new community space to look like, to present to the mayor or to the city councils or to other people who might want to be funding this work in there. And presenting a really comprehensive vision of actually what they want to do, but actually through some VR stuff and through their own imagination and work. And through that, they will develop a whole range of different, really transferable technical skills. We'll get them employed so they could actually make changes whilst they're at high school into their local environment, and whether it's planning an urban forest or planning some sort of nature park, or whether it's anything that's in their minds they want to do. At the same time, making them employable.
When I first went to work for Esri some years ago, one of the things I heard somebody saying, well, I joined this company because I want to help make the world a better place. And I will be honest with you, I was skeptical when I heard that. But what you are describing is actually that. So talk a little bit, if you will, about how you think GIS can best be used to make this world a better place, because I think that is one of the things that many of us are looking to do.
Yeah, for me, if I stay rooted in the education piece, and so it's about it's about allowing the young people, whether it's elementary school first, maybe to explore the world. Actually, if you think about what the GIS is, it's a model of the world, and every single child is inside there. Where they live, where they play, where their family is, where they go to shops, it's all inside there. And all the things we want them to learn about are also connected there. So actually just connecting those three things together and just growing out of that. GIS being a standard way of teaching. It's almost like if you'll be teaching geography, we can make the tools simple enough so you almost don't notice it. You're just actually just using a modern day atlas, if you want, for a better term, in there, as you would do, say, about 10 years ago using a paper book. And then, but also thinking about that sort of transfer of skills and knowledge as the children move up across the different age phases in there, to the point where either they leave school and go out do other subjects, but they've got some sort of geospatials and geothinking in their heads they can take with them to other places. And so, in terms of just being a citizen, they can understand data about them and about other places much better. They maybe think, well, I could do that. I'm going to go and collect some data about this thing. I learned that back in school. I'm going to be the activist in that space. But they could be doing something completely different. But they know it's a thing. But there's another path where actually there's people who will get interested in it, want to come through into the workforce, and that will give us a much a better, larger, diverse workforce where we've got all the talents instead of just some of the talents. So that's that pathway through. Yeah.
Love this. Thank you for what you're doing and bringing the young people along.
Thanks, Jason. And in the spirit of speaking about democratizing and opening up GIS to everyone, I'm curious on what you think. What do you think are the most underappreciated parts of what you do when talking about GIS for education? What do we always overlook from your perspective?
I think, particularly in the GIS industry, the complexity of working in schools. Everyone thinks it's a really simple thing. Oh, I'll make it free. Job done. No, not even close. In that. And so we're often working with schools that don't have a GIS manager. They don't know what GIS is. They don't have a GIS budget. They don't have an IT person in the school. They have no real reason to use it in the class. And so, but we're still working in that space to actually go and persuade them to actually go and do something useful in there. So our work is very complex. It involves dealing with sort of high-level pedagogy and different types of education models in there to actually help teachers understand it, so we can speak the same language, whilst taking our technology and simplifying it. Because most of the time it's not designed for that elementary school in there. So how do we break it down? How do we persuade the company to actually create something that's going to work in this particular space in there? So it's a lot about talking to people, from whether it's people who are actually in the class, the teaching assistants, teachers, students, talking to Jack, other people in the organisation. So actually, this is what we need to do. So it's really varied and really, really, really complex. So I think the complexity is the simple thing that's overlooked in there. It's at schools, simple, easy, just give them it. And we prove to death that doesn't work.
Wow, that really changes my perspective. I think I fall in that category of it's GIS, just make it free, give it to schools. And now that we've just broken it down on what that looks like for you who's actually doing that, it's very interesting and very insightful to get that perspective as well. Last but not least, I have a two-part question. One would be, in the previous episodes, we've had different guests talk about what mapping means to them using sort of one-liner or a one sentence, and I'm curious about that. Someone said mapping to them is like a tool for liberation. Someone said it's a tool for resistance. The most recent one was Dr. Liddell, who said to him it's how he connects us to the past and creates stories that resonate with us. And I'm curious to get your perspective on what mapping as a tool means to you with sort of a one-liner.
Interesting, it's like breathing. I'm not even thinking about it. It's just because I'm doing it every day. And so I was just creating some 3D work and some VR stuff. To me, I don't know. For me, it's liberation in terms of actually accessing the right content, understanding the world around you. I grew up in East London, so I used to fish and swim on the River Thames, understanding the landscape, where animals were, what state the tide was at, all sorts of different things like that that feed into me. And when I look at that, and that's just, I can abstract all those things into a GIS in there. And so it's everything.
Thank you. I like how you've gotten that off of the top of your head, and it's also really impactful one-liner. So we have this question which we ask our guests on, their year and what was that like? What wasn't in your 2024 bingo card?
Well, there's probably some obvious things that weren't in my bingo card. But if I bring it back to the UK and just sort of give you a flavour, so I'm a big rugby fan. So rugby is like American football, but without the pads and the helmet. I played a lot when I was a kid and when I was an adult. And England just beat France this weekend in the Six Nations, 26-25, the last kick of the game. I did not believe that was ever going to happen, and it did. So that made me very happy. Stepping outside of rugby, and coming into 2024, and we launched. We had almost a year of MapMaker in there, and we had an unbelievable reception from teachers about. So we created something we thought was right based on our experiences, and I had one comment back from the Internet Apps team saying, "Can we please get some negative feedback?" So it was like I was not expecting the reception we had for that. It's far from perfect, and we need to do lots more work on it. But I think we've hit the right line with that. Which is like, thank you, thanks for that.
Thank you so much.
It has been great speaking with you, Jason. We really appreciate your insights, your coming to homecoming, and the experience that you bring to our listeners. So thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, everybody. I feel it's a real privilege, a real honor to be asked to come and do this. So thank you very much.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to learn more about North Star of GIS, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at GIS North Star. North Star's programming is produced in large part by donations and sponsorship, If you'd like to support the next season of the North Star Gaze podcast, please submit your donations to northstarofgis.org/donate. If you'd like to sponsor this podcast or the homecoming event, reach out to us at the following email address: podcast@northstarofgis.org or northstargis.org/sponsor homecoming. You'll find all these links in the show notes.
We want to thank our sponsors of the 2024 homecoming event, our institutional partner Regrid, and our sponsors New Light Technology, Afrotech, and Black at Work. We'd like to thank our keynotes, Tara Roberts, Linda Harris, Dr. Paulette Hines Brown, and Vernice Miller Travis. We'd like to thank Howard University and the staff at the Interdisciplinary Building and Photography by Imagery by Chioma. We also want to thank our guests for trusting us with their stories: Tara, Linda, Paulette, Christian, Abraham, Jason, Vernice, Stella, B.E., Karen, Nikki, George, Frank, Labdi, Toussaint, Victoria, and the HBCU Environmental Justice Technical Team. And finally, thank you to the North Star team and our wonderful volunteers.
We are your hosts of the season 2 of the North Star Gaze podcast, which is based on the 2024 Homecoming Conference event. This podcast is produced by Aisha Jenkins and audio production in collaboration with Cherry Blossom Productions, Kid Bodega, and Organized Sound.
Thanks for listening to the North Star Gaze, intimate stories from geoluminaries. If you're inspired to advance racial justice in geo fields, please share this podcast with other listeners in your community. The intro and outro are produced by Organized Sound Productions with original music created by Kid Bodega. The North Star Gaze is produced in large part by donations and sponsorship. To learn more about North Star of GIS, check us out at northstarofgis.org and on Facebook or Instagram at GIS North Star. If you'd like to support this podcast and North Star of GIS, consider donating at northstarofgis.org/donate. Or to sponsor this podcast, email podcast@northstarofgis.org. You've been listening to the North Star Gaze.